Like, important point of my whole role here is to make sure that we capture this. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. And this is the second peer learning session of 2026. As you all know by now, these sessions are designed to provide a space for members to give an overview of your program's design, curriculum, lessons, and challenges. If you'd like to host one, obviously let me know and I'll book you in. We're getting quite booked up, but we've got some slots for later in the year. As you know, it's being recorded to share with those who are unable to attend and build up a library of resources for people to find out about each other. So if you do speak, you will be on the recording. If that's a problem, then drop anything into the chat. Please feel free to drop anything into the chat as we go, and I'm sure Quinn will be happy to field those questions at the end. We do ask if you could remain muted for the duration of the talk, and when you're not asking a question, it just helps with the quality of the recording for others. I think we're ready to go. So I'm just about to hand over to Quinn, who is a conservation coach, and he's going to give us some leadership insights from his work. So over to you, Quinn.
Okay, well, thank you, Shelley, and appreciate being here. I know I'm one of the newer of the group, so maybe it's a way to uh, get to know me a little bit, and hopefully you can take a couple insights away. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'll presentation here. All right, should be seeing a big green screen, different kind of green screen. Yeah, so as Shelley said, so I'm a conservation coach, so I do a lot of teaching courses, primarily to professionals, conservation professionals, as well as if I'm not doing that, then I'm coaching, typically conservation teams, that kind of thing. Um, my firm is called Nature Plan, so I have a consultancy. What myself and my partners do primarily is we help conservation organizations and partnerships to align and synergize their work through strategic planning. And this includes helping teams transition from planning to implementation during the first couple of years of a project. So I'm going to share today in this presentation two things that I believe that every conservation practitioner needs to know so they're prepared to effectively lead a team, to lead a project, to coordinate a partnership, to provide guidance on the steering committee, or to serve in any other leadership capacities. So the first thing is they need to know what the essential ingredients are that need to be included in a strategic plan. If you're going to be a leader, you need to operate under a plan, have a strategic direction. And they need to know how to create a plan so that it's an adaptable decision support tool for the team or partnership. And second, this will be a big part of this, is they need to know how to maintain and adjust and update that plan after implementation begins so it doesn't become an expensive, outdated paperweight, which so often happens. And the system, so I'll share a system that for plan implementation and continuous adjustment, which has been used successfully in the business world, and that I've taken and adapted and applied to the conservation world with some success in the last few years. So let me just get going here. So now I didn't start off as a conservation planner. In fact, I was kind of forced into it about 15 years ago when I was asked by my supervisor to lead this planning effort for greater sage-grouse. That's what you see on the screen here. It was on a site operated by the United States Department of Energy. Fortunately, I was working for the Wildlife Conservation Society at the time, and they taught me this process that's now called the conservation standards, which Nancy talked about. Was that just last month in hers? So I fell in love with this process because I realized I could make a lot bigger difference using a process like this to bring people together than by continuing to monitor birds, as fun as that was. So I began teaching and coaching the conservation standards in 2013. But as they would leave, I felt like the father letting my kids go off to college out into the big bad world for the first time, and I worried about them. And as over time, I could see that a lot of people would struggle. They could put together a good strategic plan to lead the team, but uh, but implementing that plan and keeping it updated and those details weren't people were struggling with that. And so I threw myself into learning how to implement strategic plans successfully. And the timing was good because, about 2017, 2018 is when I started my consultancy. It was part-time at that point. And so I wanted to learn business systems so that I could make my business work and be profitable. So I took classes, I read a lot of books, and I studied these frameworks. And then, of course, I was coaching on the side, and I was able to assemble whatever tools were out there in the concert among the conservation coaches, people like me out in the world. But there wasn't a lot of step-by-step guidance for how you implement a plan. There was general guidance, and so I took this. I reached out to coaches, got the best things I could from them, and put it together and started using it to help teams, and became kind of like an implementation coach for some of my consultants. So here's some of the questions that I see teams and partnerships wrestle with as they try to implement conservation plans. They'll ask, how do we translate a conservation plan into work and monitoring plans? What should be monitored to know if the project's on track? How do we create an adaptive management culture within our organization? How can we ensure the plan remains a relevant or up-to-date decision support tool? And how do we show that the project moved the conservation needle? Did we actually have an impact, or were we just busy accomplishing, things? And this is what I learned. It all comes down to systems. And we can, if we have a car, we know about this, and all we need to do if we want to be successful at implementing a conservation plan, we just need to think about what it takes to maintain our car. So successful businesses, they put effective systems in place. You have to want to implement a conservation plan successfully. You have to follow a tried and true system, basically. And so think about this. What would happen if you bought a new car, but you never did any sort of maintenance? You never changed the oil, you never checked the fluids, you didn't rotate the tires. 5 years down the road, you'd probably run into problems. In fact, you might find yourself actually stranded alongside the road, and it'd be time to revise the revise the car, so to speak. So I see a lot of teams who treat their conservation plans like this. They put a bunch of resources into creating a shiny new plan they're all excited about, but they don't have a system. They haven't thought about how they're going to maintain that plan during the implementation. So 5 years later, it's broken and they have to revise it. We've often seen that. Okay, 5 year or 10-year revisions. Um, What's worse, if it's being revised every 5 years, probably the last 2 or 3 years it was being used less and less as a primary decision support tool because it was becoming increasingly outdated. It's like when I have my junker car outside that my teenagers drive, it's fine for getting around town, but I hesitate to use it to its full capacity to drive, several hours south or something. And so I don't use it to its full capacity. And that's what happens with plans. If it's getting to revision time, it means that it's probably not being that useful. So here's some things I've put together, your signs that your adaptive management system may be broken. Um, if your plan is outdated or your team rarely refers to it, it's probably your adaptive management system's broken. If you have plan details that have not changed for the last 2 years, the adaptive management system is probably broken. If you have strategy shifts that happen informally, without documentation or reflection, that's not a good sign. If you make annual work plans and they're created from scratch rather than relying on what's in the strategic plan, that's a sign it's not being adaptively managed. If you are collecting monitoring data, but you're not really discussing and incorporating that and making changes to the plan based on the monitoring data, that's a sign the system's broken. If learning and documentation occur only at the end of a grant or a funding cycle, this is one we're often guilty of, that's a sign that you don't have a good adaptive management system. And kind of the biggie that I've been alluding to, if your plan needs a major revision, the adaptive management system is probably broken. Occasionally it's you get new leadership and they require it, or especially if you're in a government job and the administration changes, but typically it's a sign that there's a problem with your system. Now, the good news is it's not our fault. It's not your fault because if you're like me, few of us received any training in this kind of thing. This is me back in my grad school days. I was trapping rats in California and Western United States. I had never heard, I don't think I'd even heard the term adaptive management when I was working in grad school. I just learned things like statistics and genetics and evolution. So, but in the real world, we have to figure this out if we're going to be effective. Conserving wildlife is about working with people. So I have put together I had this epiphany right about the first of this year. I thought, I've been working as kind of this implementation coach, and there's not a lot of step-by-step details out there. So I thought, I think I'll just package it up. So I've put a bunch of my resources, my experience together, and I'm starting to share this out with the world in a framework I call the spiral loop, or spiral for short, or for long. Maybe that's for long. Anyway, here's my framework, which is first, if you want to create an adaptive management culture, first you need to set an adaptive foundation. Second, you prepare relevant work and monitoring plans. Third, you institute quarterly meetings. Fourth, you reflect annually. And then fifth, you adapt, adjust, and archive. Now, the loop portion is just pointing us to the fact that this is iterative, and this goes round and round each year. So I'm gonna walk us through each of these steps, and hopefully this will generate some ideas and discussion here at the end. So a typical conservation plan functions like a paper roadmap with the route of travel marked out. And that's certainly better than nothing, don't get me wrong, but it's not dynamic. And if there's any major changes, the paper gets really messy and confusing with cross out lines and scribbles. And eventually it's better to just make a clean, fresh map. But a well-designed strategic plan functions more like a GPS unit. It's dynamic and will adapt the route in real time based on an assessment of incoming data. And that's what you want if you're what you want to build if you're on a project management team or in any kind of leadership position. So if you want to be guided by a GPS unit, you have to give it some basic information. We all know this. We're very accustomed to GPS these days. First, you have to give it a destination. It has to know what you value, meaning you want a fuel efficient route or just the quickest route. It needs to know where you're starting from. Is it your current position or some other place? It needs to know how you're going to get there. Is it walking, by the bus, car, etc.? And then if you input that information, it will give you a predicted route with an estimated time of arrival. Now, a conservation plan, if it's to serve as your team's guidance system, has to have the same basic elements baked in. You have to have a vision so the team knows where they're going. You need to identify the values that you're going to focus on, whether they be species or ecosystems or both. You need to know what your current status is. You need to collect the baseline. And you need to know how you're going to get there. Those are your prioritized actions. Now, the conservation standards framework, which again Nancy talked about last time, we're really pounding you with this as a group, but it's this is the process I use. What I recommend, you wouldn't. I mean, there's other ways, other systems you could use to get this information. But the thing I love about the conservation standards is that it has a tool called a results chain. So this results chain is how you get the predicted route and estimated time of arrival. Um, it allows the team to document their assumptions about how an action will lead to the desired impacts or their goals. And they then set time-bound benchmarks that we call objectives along the way so they know how long it will take to get there. And I've never seen this tool is unique to the conservation standards. Other structures will develop a theory of change. This is essentially a theory of change, but a results chain is a really useful tool that can be used in honestly any leadership situation where you're going to take action and you want to know how you're going to get there to the desired outcome. So because this is such a key part of a good adaptive plan, and because it serves as a bridge between strategic planning and implementation, I want to just spend a few minutes for those aren't familiar with the team or aren't familiar with the tool to just show you how this works in case you haven't seen it. So a results chain, you take your action, we're going to do X, and then you just predict what the results should be in kind of if then. All right, if we take this action, then we should get result one. And if that happens, that'll lead to result two and to result three. Eventually, if we're in an ecological system, we should see threats being reduced and those values, those species or ecosystems should improve. And so here's an example, a sea turtle example. Let's say this is from a real study, but this team want to conserve sea turtles. They were getting caught, they were as bycatch by fishers because the fishers use this kind of hook that made it susceptible for the turtles to get caught. And so the action they wanted to take was to test and promote circle hooks to reduce bycatch. So if they could get people to use these hooks, they thought that there'd be less sea turtles being hooked. And so that's the action. So the result is they predict that if they implemented a bunch of activities associated with this, then they would be able to, the effectiveness of the circle hooks would be demonstrated. If they were demonstrated to be effective, then the fishers would be willing to change their gear. And if they're willing to change their gear, then the fishers would also then use the circle hooks. And if that happens, the threat, bycatch mortality in hook lines would be reduced, and as a result, sea turtles would be improved. So that's the results chain there. And then this team set measurable objectives along the way so they could monitor if they're really achieving this. Objective one, by a certain date, 20 test cases show circle hook catch is at least as effective as J hooks. Okay, so they know that tells them if they achieve that result. Objective two, by 2029, 40% of fishers are using circle hooks and so forth. They could set one for objective three. And then they can also set a goal to measure impact. By 2032, the turtle population is 20% higher than in 2022. So the beauty of this tool, it allows the team to really think through their assumptions about how they're going to get from, yay, we got an action we're going to do to sea turtles being improved. And everything you need to create your work and monitoring plans lives in this results chain. So you could list out a whole bunch of activities that would need to happen to make this action happen. Those can go in your work plan. And then your monitoring plan, you're able to take these objectives. These tell you if you're getting the results that you predicted. The goal, if you're monitoring that, tells you if you're having an impact. And if you look at these activities in the work plan, you can determine if you're doing what you said you'd do. These are if you're getting the results. Actually, I think I have one more to click. There you go. You can monitor if you're doing what you said you'd do, if you're getting the results, and if you're having an impact. So it sets you up to have the kind of monitoring that you need if you're going to be adaptive. Okay, so that's the first step. The second step is to prepare relevant work and monitoring plans. Now, I I scoured the looked the world over, literally. I reached out to conservation coaches across the world when I was wanting to help teams better implement plans to say, are there any templates out there that people have for taking a good written plan and results chains and converting it into work and monitoring plans? And there really weren't. And so I had to create my own, but with a lot of help from other coaches, taking parts and pieces that they have. And so I created this spreadsheet that is pictured here that helps us to take all the information from a plan, from a results chain, and create a good monitoring and work plan. So you can the first thing I do is I take all the actions and I put it into a multi-year plan. I just list out so this would represent, here's our strategy, our action, okay? And then maybe there's up to 10 different activities that we're going to do with this. And then we just list out who the person who's in charge of each of them. What year is this going to be implemented? Are we going to be working on some of these activities? We'll probably work on this year. Others might be next year. Others might be 3 or 4 years down the road. And so we can document that in this high level multi-year work plan. And then the next thing to do is any activity that shows up as that's going to be implemented in 2026, all those get copied and pasted into a 1-year work plan. So I can have in front of me all the activities to be done in the next 12 months. And it's similar. It would show who's the lead person and it shows which quarter of the year it's going to be worked on. And then I can set what I call the dry monitoring plan, a monitoring plan that, as I showed in the last slide, that shows us, are we doing what we said we'd do? That's if we monitor the activities. Are we getting the predicted results? And that's if we monitor the objectives along this results chain, we can get that. And are we moving the needle? Are we having an impact? So DRI, monitoring goals. So any good strategic plan should have this three-pronged monitoring plan to monitor do, results, and impact. And this sets you up so you can have this all in one place. And I use a spreadsheet because when I work with teams, they're busy partners and they don't want to learn some new fancy software. Everybody knows an Excel spreadsheet, and so we just have everything right there. All right, so they set up their work and monitoring plans. The next is to institute quarterly meetings. And this is a critical step and something that I really learned well from the business world. And just as an aside, in the business world, if you don't implement well and execute well, you go out of business, right? You don't bring in income. In the conservation world, it's hate to say it, but if you don't implement well, you might just keep getting money from the government agency or from your donors, and you just keep going along. It's not so much of a cliff that you're out of business. And so they've really perfected in the business world how to make sure that they stay on track with what they're aiming to do. So I strongly encourage teams to meet quarterly. Sometimes teams, they're out in the field in the summer and such, and so at least the leadership team should get together quarterly. And that's partly because research has shown us humans, we don't do very well focusing on anything for more than 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Sometimes that's the case too. For more than 90 days. After 90 days, and you can see this in your New Year's resolutions. We should all about be lost on our New Year's resolutions by now. It's March, and that's because it's hard to focus unless you have a system for refocusing you. So, quarterly meetings allow you to build relationships. That's important as part of it. But it gives a chance for everybody to come in, report on their progress. They select priorities for their next 90 days. They're reporting on what they did in the last 90 days. They're solving problems together and learning together. And if there's monitoring data, they're analyzing that kind of thing. So the benefits of this is you're increasing your trust and motivation. There's increased accountability because you know that in 90 days you're going to need to report back on what you said you'd do. There's transparency, and as you get into a big team with maybe there's different working groups, it's easy to lose track of what each other are doing. A lot of transparency, and it allows you, most importantly, to adjust rapidly to changing conditions. So that's key. And then reflect annually. This step is about getting together, making sure you pause and reflect at the end of the year or at the beginning of the first year. With my teams, it's usually in December, it seems like, as we're wrapping up the year. This is an opportunity to reflect on the progress that's been made in the last year, to review the monitoring information that's come in. Oftentimes, monitoring is more of on an annual basis anyway. Um, this is a time, unlike the quarterly meetings, when we'll take some of the time to review parts of the strategic plan, not all of it, because that would probably take too long. And this is a chance to revise what's needed. And then we update the multi-year work plan and the monitoring plans. And then we create new 12-month plans. So we're set to go for the following year, and it's based on the strategic plan. And of course, again, it's an opportunity to strengthen relationships if you do it right. And then finally, adapt, adjust, and archive. So I've found that partners often, especially if I'm working with a partnership, a collaborative, something like that, the different individuals in their organizations, they're collecting information. They know what they're doing, but it's housed on their computer. And we may even come together in an annual meeting, but it's not intuitive or not a high priority often for the members to report back all that they're doing into one central repository. But that's really critical to do if the collaborative is to be able to demonstrate success. Otherwise, one of the partners goes away or somebody changes jobs and we've lost the information, and it's not easy to document what we've been doing. So I have a process I use especially the annual meeting, sometimes the quarterly meeting, where if there's a written plan, we go and update that. If they're using software for organizing their the strategic plan, common ones are Merati and Mural, etc. Those get updated. That dry do results impact monitoring plan gets updated. Your multi-year and annual plan, all these get updated, and then you actually create the 12-month plan because in the annual meeting you're just talking about it. And this is a key step that, as I said, a lot of times people get together and talk, but they don't have it as their standard operating procedure to make sure all these documents and the operating system that's happening in the background, it gets updated. And so over time, you lose the ability to demonstrate your impact and the results. And then finally, the last part, rinse and repeat. So this is just each year you're just going through this cycle. So I've had probably the most thorough vetting of this framework with a team I've worked with since 2023, the Capon Watershed Collaborative. They're in West Virginia, which is in the eastern United States. And here's the logos of the different members of this partnership. They are this collaborative decide they want to work more collaboratively to keep the ecological value of working farms, forests, and streams from being degraded by development and other threats. So they create a plan using the action planning process I walked you through. They use the conservation standards. And incidentally, just as an aside, this plan has been turning a lot of heads, and this is in the Chesapeake Bay region uh, since it was completed. Here's an example of an article that was put out about a blueprint for collaborative planning. We're proud of that. So every time we get together at the beginning of each quarterly meeting or the annual meeting, typically it's this slide that is shown, the entire strategic plan in a nutshell. Here's their vision, where they're going. Here's their values. They're aiming to improve forests, streams, and farms. You can see the pink boxes that these are the threats to those values. And then the yellow hexagons they have 5 strategies that they are working on. And they're divided into different working groups are tackling each of these strategies. So this is put up. It's a reminder, and we get actually surprisingly really positive feedback when we put this up. They're like, "Oh, thanks for that reminder of where we're going." That is, if there's one leadership hack I've learned, I don't know, T leadership tip, it's the leader is constantly pointing people back to their vision and where they're going. The best leaders I've seen are just constantly beating that drum. Um, so we'll meet uh, in our quarterly meetings. Often they have lunch together. We've got it boiled down to we can make this happen in a 2-hour meeting. They'll share their accomplishments, the working groups. They set their priorities or share their priorities. They probably already met together as a working group to figure out what those are for the next 90 days. They coordinate work among the different working groups. Any issues that come up, they work on those together. Any monitoring data that's come in, they'll discuss it. And they move the location around. If often there'll be a hike or a field trip after. So I've actually learned a lot working with this group of the power of building in these relationship building opportunities in each meeting. It's pretty cool to see. The annual meeting, we get together at some place. I usually fly out for this one. We have lunch together. This one there's more to do in an annual meeting, so we can do this in 3 hours. That's the best we can do in terms of shortness. But often there's presentations. Um, we'll review. My part really is to bring the parts of the strategic plan and help them to review parts of them. And you don't have to do every part every year, but some parts like the results chains, they look at every year. They'll review and revise their multi-year work plan, create their 12-month work plan, again, solve issues together, and have a little fun together. And this is an example. I showed you the example of the template earlier. Here's how they're using this template. You can see for their work and monitoring plans. Here's one of their strategies to support the improvement, identification, and creation of brook trout patches. You can see they've identified 8 different activities. Not all of them, they have lead person or organization identified. But they've identified what years they're going to be working on it. And so when they get together, they can update. Are we on track or not? They can take notes. This has just worked really well as this one-stop shop for having information there. And I should say it's also so just this group after the first year or so they applied for a $250,000 grant and they asked me to put together the part that shows what the collaborative has done so far. And it only took me like an hour to write this section because I could just come to this sheet and all the notes were here and I could just go down for every working group, every strategy. It was all laid out and I could write that up in a nice way in about an hour's time. And they won the grant. And it was just a real example to me of how having this archived information all in one place in a good template is just so valuable. This is their results chain for one of their actions, and they'll look at this every year. And then I'm usually tasked to go in and make any changes to the objectives or the language here, or to update if they've accomplished some of these. So and then they have a written strategic plan. And you'll notice this is forward facing. You can access this on their website, but it says iterations starting February of this year. I go in every year or even every few months. And if there's any changes that come out of a quarterly meeting or the annual, I go in and make adjustments. It's in a Google Doc. And so that plan is constantly changing, but it's constantly up to date with the team's thinking, which is good. That's the point of the plan. So just to wrap this all up, the spiral loop, which is my process for helping teams create and implement and maintain a plan that's continually adaptive and never needs to be overhauled. This eliminates the need to revise your plan, unless your top dog leader says revise your plan. Uh, is first you got to set the adaptive foundation. You have to have certain elements, these elements in place if you want to have an adaptive strategy. Next, you need to prepare relevant work and monitoring plans with a three-pronged monitoring plan to monitor if you're doing what you said you'd do, if you're getting the results you predicted, and if you're having an impact. The results chain is the best tool I know for helping to do this in a streamlined way. And then once you start implementing your plan, you need to hold quarterly meetings, and then annual meetings. And these cannot be replaced. They can be adapted, as I said. Maybe it's just the leaders to get together, at least for the quarterly meetings. But you've got to touch base if you want to keep from the plan from floating and things getting out of date, out of hand. And then finally, you need to have a system where after every meeting, somebody's tasked to go and record and archive the decisions and update the documents and files and such. So when I present this to, I've started presenting this out, I've packaged things together so that people can take a course. I teach a couple courses for the first step to learn the conservation standards. But then I offer this is my approach so far this year is I put a bunch of everything I've developed, my templates. I'll just show all these. I put together, I've got video tutorials, templates, checklists, agenda templates, everything that I've developed over the years to help me create this system. I've started packaging together. I've been marketing that to see if people would pay a little bit to essentially build a bridge so they can, instead of taking years to figure this out, they can take a few weeks and get right into it. So that's been my kind of my marketing plan for this year, and we'll see how it goes. But I think that's it. So I'll stop there and stop share. And I guess just open up for questions. Thank you. I'd be interested, certainly in, of course, in questions, but I'd be really interested. You guys are experienced group here, a group that I'm not selling to. I'd be really interested in any thoughts on just this in general, or if you have any experience with, helping teams to implement their strategies, that kind of thing.
Quinn, I'll go. Thank you for this. It's always nice to get a refresher. I think I did my coach training in 2010. So
Wow.
it's really nice to see evolution and adaptations to the adaptive management cycle, not to be too meta. Two things stand out for me that I want to punctuate as a follow-on. First, many of you will recall we've tried to share widely the conservation leadership global landscape study that was completed in 2020 with our colleagues at Smithsonian Institution and National Geographic. And there were 8 particular kind of areas of focus that conservation leaders, they came out with that conservation leaders really should have in their pocket. And I'm going to put a link to the report for new friends here that are in the space. You can open it up. It's living on a platform with our colleagues at the American Museum of Natural History because one of the co-authors was there. But 2 things stand out. There's a list of 8 of these kind of essential skills, essential areas of practice that a conservation leader needs to have. One of them is being able to develop monitoring and evaluation processes that focus on outcomes and impacts. Another one is listening, facilitating, and managing with empathy and respectful communication. Obviously, the process that you just walked us through really focuses on that listening and facilitating. And the other part is applying systems thinking to conservation challenges in practice. So, I mean, this approach certainly checks the box and really is foundational, I think, to a lot of conservation practice. So, a question I'd like to pose before I share my next comment is, how might we envision? I mean, the conservation standards community of practice is vibrant. It has many members, And yet we still want to make sure that this skill set, access to this kind of process and approach is widely accessible to all conservation leaders, whether they're coming into the space or whether they're seasoned. Are there things that you see in the community of practice or in the Conservation Coaches Network, ways maybe that our group, our transformation network can help make sure that that access by conservation leaders is easier to get their hands on this kind of approach?
When you say to get access, meaning to like get access to this document or just to
I
understand it
mean, being
better?
able to understand what the approach is that you just outlined for us. Like, how do people, I mean, obviously not everybody's going to put in the time to become a coach.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can hire fantastic people like you as well. But given that this is such an underpinning skill set, not only the facilitation, but understanding the M&E pieces of it, and as well as the systems thinking element of it, how might our group facilitate more access to what you just described?
It's a good question. There's a conservation standards adoption group. Well, it used to be called adoption. Now it's more of just a like a mastermind group where people come together every 2 months. Though anyone's invited to discuss challenges that or things they're working on. I wonder if it'd be interesting to bring it up to them to see what they thought, because the conservation standards, it's kind of alluded to before, is really good. There's a lot of very
Yeah.
detailed steps about how you create a plan. That's where it's strong. And then the implementation, there's what they call steps 3 through 5, which have
Yep.
general principles, right? But the details of systems thinking, and that's or the M&E plan, that kind of thing, that becomes organizational. Different organizations do it different. There's not any kind of step-by-step recipe. I mean, there's probably some out there, but not nearly as much guidance. And so that's a good question. I wonder if others on here who are also in this community have suggestions. Um,
Yeah, it's just such an underpinning skill set, and it just touches so many of those pieces.
yeah.
I guess as I'll close, and then I want to see if other people have questions, but is an invitation to you. I mean, obviously, the Conservation Leadership Transformation Network has its own goals and objectives. And as Kate and I and Shelley and Ashleen have been thinking about how to make sure that the Transformation Network itself is reaching goals, is if you would be interested, Quinn, in consulting with us to make sure that how we actually are designing this network itself is meeting needs and goals that have been identified. Ashleen has spent a good part of the last year identifying needs and desires by this group, which is very diverse in terms of academic, cross-sector, private sector, agency, and NGO. How to kind of look at the activities that we're putting a lot of energy into and making sure that those are driving the kind of outputs and outcomes that we're trying to drive for conservation leaders at the end of the day. So just an invitation for you to think about, because we're really excited to have you in this circle and in this network. And I saw a lot of things in your presentation that made me go, I wonder if we were more articulate about describing a certain set of outcomes that we'd like to reach for this network, that maybe we could attract some funding to help do some piloting and expand our reach and effectiveness. So I want to just thank you for that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, that sounds interesting. We'll talk. We should talk about it. Yeah, happy to help where I can. Thank you.
And can I jump in?
Yeah, hi, Nancy.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I thought you did such a great job in terms of making the process really clear, the tools you were using really clear. I love the car examples because there's things that we could all relate to. So I thought you did a wonderful job presenting, and I really appreciate that. I think one of the problems with a lot of conservation projects is that they're short term. And so to be able to, have the quarterly meetings and look annually, you really have to have that funding and the people there for longer term projects. So I thought that the length of the project becomes really important. And I think it's really important to advocate for longer projects, because to do conservation work, to be able to monitor and evaluate and learn, it has to be longer term. So that was one thing I wanted to point out. The other thing I wanted to point out is personalities. You have certain people when you're on a team, and I had mentioned to you this to you, Quinn. When Dr. Heather Eves is on your team, you're going to be going back and monitoring and evaluating again and again and again. She's just going to get everyone together and make sure that it happens. And sometimes people just love, the planning process and the monitoring, and so they're very engaged in doing it. But other times, to get everybody to meet again and again, and it can be a role of donors, to make sure that you have the annual plans, that you're doing the monitoring and evaluation, that there are meetings to bring things together. So that can also be a role for donors. But I love the way you presented it, and just really thank you. I think you've given me certainly a lot to think about on how you teach this, how you make sure that people who are part of a project, continue to monitor and evaluate over and over again. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Nancy. A couple thoughts. That's the personality part. That is a challenge. In the West Virginia group, they have a coordinator, and that person she's really enthused. They have a grant, and that's so they're able to uh, hire me for a little bit to help the coordinator, because I'm often the one I'm preparing you have to have somebody that you don't just sit down in the meeting to look over the strategic plan. Somebody had to prepare and figure out what to do so it's efficient and things like that. So yes, and her leadership is critical. So personality is important. There's that, of course, there's personality and the person knowing what to do. You can mitigate for a lot of personality if the person just has the system, certainly. The other thing I was thinking, short-term projects, I guess I would argue, if you're in a business that is really run efficiently, they're meeting weekly to essentially do this kind of thing. Every Monday morning, perhaps they're checking in, they're solving issues together, they're doing that kind of thing. Of course, they're all in the same business. That's what they're being paid for. They're not partners, they're volunteering. But I would argue that on the short-term project, maybe you're checking in monthly. The key is you're just not letting yourself. I've just been with projects where we come up with a plan. Here's our plan to do this year, and then we check in at the end of the year, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that we were going to do that, right?" And now you're a year later, and they're, "Oh yeah, okay, we'll do it this year." And they lost a year rather than 90 days later, they could have been reminded. And so I just think you just shorten those time frames down if it's a short-term project. But anyway, a couple thoughts there. If you're okay, so I'm a real geek when it comes to personal improvement type stuff. My family has a strategic plan. And then my kids are not real tolerant. Well, my wife's not really tolerant of it either. We have a vision statement for our family, that kind of thing. But now I don't sit down with them weekly, but every Monday morning I sit down and I track my metrics of did I chat with one of my teenagers this last week, and did I do this and that? And so you can do this at any scale, but the idea is to keep tracking. So anyway.
Thank you. I had a quick question, and thank you so much, Quinn. This has been really insightful and really helpful to learn more about. I was wondering about kind of some of the barriers that maybe a project or a team or an organization has in working with you or a similar program. So beyond funding, which is always, always going to be there, and kind of how that can be addressed. So like sometimes there's apprehension around kind of instituting a new consulting or a strategy or a tool when it takes capacity to do so and time, effort, focus. And maybe there's just the thought of like, you know what, let's just do it ourselves. This is a lot, or, we can't step away from just like the day-to-day grind to step back and do this kind of work, which is important to place a lot of focus on. So I was wondering if you've experienced that and how you've kind of approached that kind of thoughts from a potential team.
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier I've faced, and that was when I was doing my wildlife work, is a team who are uh, grudgingly participating. They do not love planning, and they think it's this idea of revisiting thing is a waste of time, right? They're busy, and that's the biggest challenge when it comes to. In that case, I had to be a little more clandestine, and I would do a lot of stuff on my own computer. We'd go into meetings and we would talk about things, and I'd come and organize it in the background so that when we go to the next meeting, I could say, "So I'm curious. Here's what happened, and this is what you said you were going to do." And so I would try and do it. That's difficult if you don't have people on board. That's probably the biggest challenge I see. It would be ideal if every project could have even a few $1,000s, $5,000 or $10,000 to hire somebody to just come in and facilitate the quarterly meetings because it's going to be run, the best that way. But of course, we don't. That often isn't the case. And so, yeah, in terms of challenges that way, that's it's it really comes. Well, here's one. I don't know if it's a challenge, but a challenge is another challenge is people aren't really clear. They made the plan. There's always a big effort to do the plan, and then like, we're done with the plan. Now we can go back to business as usual. And
Hmm.
so it's really helpful if whoever's putting the plan together, if you can create a team charter, for example, just come together and say, what do we need to do to make have that discussion and write it down in your charter. And that alone could make a big difference, I think, because it's either they're grudgingly they don't want to do any more of that, or they're just busy and without something they can refer back to. After a few months, they forgot what they did in the last meeting, and so it just evolves back into a discussion of what
Hmm.
they used to do. So, yeah,
Yeah,
it's a couple.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously very helpful to do that because the results will speak for themselves, but getting that buy-in is really crucial.
Yeah. And in business, standard operating procedures, SOPs are a big deal. And that's what I push. That's not a thing in conservation and biology. We don't think in terms of SOPs. And that's what I push. That's why part of the package is you document your process. This is 1 month before we hold this, we create the agenda. And three, whatever, 6 weeks before the annual meeting, we do this, and we print the paper on 8.5 by 11 sheets for this one, and 11 by, and you just have it so that if I go away, somebody else can step in and just do it. And I think yeah, that helps too. Dawson, I think you were about to speak.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely been kind of like circling around my question and just a little context here. Dawson Metcalf, I work with the Conservation Leadership Program at Colorado State University, and we very much use the conservation standards as a part of our curriculum that our students go through and everything. I was just really curious, like, if anyone else has experienced this, just with everything in particular the US, like with the federal administration and impacts that we're having, especially in like how some of our collaboratives have been funded, we're having to take like a bigger step back and really think about motivations and morale and some of these kind of components here before we even get to this step of like, all right, let's alter process and everything. And Quinn, I was just really just curious, like, have you been experiencing maybe like a larger focus and maybe that setting that adapted foundation or like having to jump back to that, especially in this kind of sphere that we're in right now? Because I'm experiencing that at a different level, I feel like.
Hmm. Meaning people like, all right, budgets are tight and stuff. We need to step back and really be more efficient at what we're doing. That type of, is that what you're referring to, or?
I mean, I think it's that, but I think it's coupled with just like burnout in the field and like, how this like big step back of like, what are we even accomplishing anymore? Like, I mean, I think it's both. And I know I'm just having a lot more challenging conversations around that with some of my external partners about like kind of that morale and like we're still doing the good work and everything, but also motivating my students to even see the value in like continuing or talking to students that are interested in this discipline. And I think it's just all compounding. And I hate to be so negative and I try to smile and be really upbeat, but like, man, I think that's what we're feeling. And I talk to so many of my partners that are doing kind of consulting work or these kind of plans for conservation project. And I'm just like, this seems to be a gap that I just want to talk about more and see if there's any best practices or anything along those lines.
That's interesting. I certainly hear more, I don't know if you say despair. Sometimes it's despair, others doubling down, like we're going to carry through with this. I don't deal as much with students, so I've seen that on like Reddit. Should I even go into this field? Maybe I'll go back to bartending. I've seen that kind of thing, but when I'm dealing with professionals, of course, they're already in. It's more of concerns about budget and well, a year ago, exactly a year ago, people were worried about keeping their jobs or not. That was a big deal. But no, so I haven't probably seen as much as you because you're dealing with students. But my flag I'm waving is as things get tough and budgets get tough, you better know that if you can only do one thing, you better know you're doing the most high leverage thing. Of course, that's because that's what I do. So that's how I push it. But yeah, it's interesting. You've been seeing that though, especially hearing from the students. I'll bet there'll be a dip in terms of people going into this field right now, at least. Nina, how can we use the conservation standards to celebrate progress? Can you expand on that? That's interesting.
Well, it's in response to Dawson's comment, and that I mean we reach benchmarks, right? As we're doing this work. I mean, my work is so solely really focused on strengthening practitioners' ability to achieve outcomes, basically, and that progress is slow, right? A lot of times it's how do we help you secure this fellowship? How do we help you refine a certain skill set? How do you then apply that skill set successfully? 5, 7, 8 years pass, right? So how do we celebrate the milestones? And I've never seen anything in the conservation standards, but like, I mean, even just like turning things red, yellow, green, right? Like we do that on status. We talk about condition, right? In terms of like, or have we changed the level of threat, or have we ameliorated the source of the threat, right? There's little celebrations that like different activities and different things that we do in conservation change the course of the outcome, and some of them are really small. And I know like in conservation we're always like, we've saved this species or we've protected this ginormous 1,000,000-hectare place, but how might we change the culture of conservation so that we are celebrating the incremental wins? I think is that what we're saying. And to Dawson's point, like, because your early career, or even if you're mid-career, maybe you're not as close to this kind of work where you're making these ginormous the ones that are kind of more broadly celebrated in our social medias and things like that. Like, you know what? We just were able to like turn the knob a little bit here, but this might have a really good outcome. And so
Yeah.
I think that's what he's saying is like, how might we use a process like this to just turn some things maybe green instead of yellow? And I
Or
don't know.
yellow instead of
Yeah,
red, right?
right.
I know we're out of time, but let me respond to I think the beauty of the conservation standards by saying up, here's our objectives, here's where we are, got our baselines, and here's where we're going. And even before we get to the green, there is yellow, right? And if you want to, I think if we can use more of your dashboards, like Bush Heritage, they're an Australian group, they're big into conservation standards. They have an amazing on their website, amazing scorecards where they go in and they'll show where they started. It'll be pointing to kind of the reddish area. We were at this, and now we're a little bit higher for each of their conservation targets, for each of their threats. And it's beautiful. And if you're setting it up right, which the conservation standards does, and you're tracking and reporting in every year, on your website, you could show the incremental, some are worse, but some are better. And you can just, because you got metrics. And I think that's a great way to celebrate. So aren't we just waiting for, are there more sea turtles? Well, that's going to take a lot of years to figure that out. Great idea.
Great. Well, yeah, we are at time. It's really great that we've ended thinking about how we celebrate success, even those small wins, and even that. This has been a really like high energy, brilliant presentation. Thanks, Quinn. I'm looking forward to going home and suggesting to my husband this family strategic plan. I think him and my 13-year-old son are going to love it. So I'll let you know how that goes.
Yeah, do let us know how that goes.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. But yeah, thanks very much, everybody. Take care. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you all on the next call, which is on the 18th of March. And we have a round robin call at 4 p.m. UK time. So thank you, everybody. Take care. And I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Quinn. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Take good care. Good to see everybody. Bye.